When you look at the charts, the people who are in the top 20 globally, I'm not just talking about in this country, they are people like Matt Redman, Tim Hughes, all the Hillsong people. There are no black British gospel artists in the top 50 when I looked through it, nationally or globally. The black British gospel music industry does not feature in those charts. I also looked at the music itself, so I did a musicological analysis on the music. So here I found that the cymbal melodies were used, the major key was often used, so those of you who are musicians know that major is often associated with happiness, pleasure, positivity. Minor, the minor key is often associated with negativity, fear, disquiet. So the minor is often used in horror movies, and if you want a happy sound, you use the major key. There was a lot of repetition, lots of call and response. Again, this is not surprising for a Pentecostal environment. And simple lyrics were often used as well. And often in the lyrics, there's, again, an emphasis on the positive, the happy, and so forth. And I found in the content analysis that I did, there were very, very few references to foreboding or death or negativity. It was all very positive, happy stuff. So that was one side of the music. And all these ideas that we have here, those conform with ideas that other people have found in terms of praise and worship music. And often, praise and worship music in the literature is critiqued because of its lack of, some people say, it lacks a kind of deep spiritual depth, and it lacks kind of sophisticated musicology. But also looking at the music and listening to the music, it was rhythmically very complex. There was lots of syncopation, there was lots of jazz rhythms, lots of altered chords. So harmonically and rhythmically, it was very, very sophisticated. So there was an idea here that there was some scholars refer to it as blackenizing. Yeah? So the music, Tim Hughes, Matt Redman, the music was altered to fit a black church aesthetic. When we walk into a black church, we expect a certain type of sound. So these songs were being used, the CCM songs were being used, but they were jazzed up to fit a black church aesthetic. And one of my interviewees said, because even the Hillsong stuff we do, I still feel we make it black. We don't make it so Hillsongy, like you feel it's all English people singing. And do people recognise that? Yeah. So there's a kind of a blackenizing there that takes place. And so my third element, my Natayes refers to this as the poetic. Those are the producers. Now, what I wanted to do here was I spoke to two groups of people. I spoke to people in the Christian music industry, the gospel music industry, and I also talked to the praise and worship members of the team. And this was really interesting because what I found out was that the music had changed over a period of time. So this small church, when they met, they started in somebody's front room with about 8 people. They grew very, very quickly, moved to a community centre, and then they moved into this Grade 2 listed building. And what they told me was that when they were in the small community centre, they were singing lots and lots of West African songs. But when they moved into the Grade 2 listed building, emphasis on prosperity, they were told that they could no longer, there was a directive from the leadership that they could no longer sing those songs. They had to sing songs that were popular, that were going to attract the local white community, and to ensure that they were a modern church. They were seen to be a modern church. The person that I interviewed, who was the Minister of Music, he said to me that in his interview, he was told that it was his job to bring the X Factor to the church. And so in the style of the X Factor, When he came, he re-auditioned all the members of the praise and worship team and all the choirs, and if they weren't up to the cut, they were got rid of. And so the new team, very young, fashionable, they looked good on stage, they sounded good, musically they were very sophisticated. They were the new team that represented the church. The church had a particular type of representation, and that's what they needed for it. Another thing that changed as well is that I've already said that this idea that West African songs couldn't fit. So one of the pastors said in a sermon, and I quoted him here, "Regardless of how it may appear in the natural, we are not a Nigerian church, an African church, or even a black church. We are called to be a church for all nations, and the culture of this church must represent the plethora of cultures represented in this nation and must be conducive for everyone to fit." So this shift had taken place, and there was this fear of perhaps, engaging politically or even racially with some of the material because of this need to be seen to be international. So I argue that often churches who look like this are singing material where the economic beneficiaries look like this. And thank you, Noel. And I think that's problematic, So while, we want to be inclusive, and also we don't want to repay the favor that was paid to us when we came and not be welcoming to the other, we are denying our cultural heritage. We're undermining our cultural heritage. And if I go back to my previous slide where we've got the African American, there is a privileging of African American material, but our own British material is not privileged. And I argue in my thesis, that there's black isn't a homogeneous whole. We're not all the same as black. But sometimes in our churches, it seems that if we cling to any blackness in terms of our musicality, we cling to an African American blackness and not a British blackness or a West African blackness. And there's a young man who's sitting in the audience here who I interviewed for my thesis, and he says, despite the amazing legacy of the black church, we do not have a song. And we probably know that, our popular music industry is propped up by people who've trained within the black church. Our music is our most successful cultural artifact. And we are not singing our songs. We are not privileging our songs. Now, I know there are lots of problems, around the CCLI because, a lot of the people that I spoke to said they didn't believe that churches should pay licenses for singing church music. They believe songs are given by the Holy Spirit, so, we don't have to worry about copyright. God's given me those songs, I don't need to pay for them. Some Christian artists I spoke to said that. Some churches have the license, but they don't report regularly. I spoke to some people at CCLI who are trying to encourage the black churches to sign up for the license. So there's all sorts of difficulties around the license. Some people have said that the nature of Pentecostal worship mitigates against a license and filling forms in and knowing what songs you're going to sing. So there are lots of difficulties around that. But we know that within our churches we have artistic brilliance, strength, resilience, as shown by Kingdom Choir at the Royal Wedding. But where are our songs? Where is our material? People like Bazil, Noel, who's sitting here, and there may well be others, have worked for years and years and years. When I spoke to one of I won't name the person, someone at a record company, he said, well, your black music is too complicated. It's you just do too much. You've got to make it more simple. But regardless whatever the difficulties are, we need to find a way to privilege our own. We have so much to offer, both the white church and the black church. They need to hear our voices, And I think one of the ideas about using this music discourse model, I'm not saying that the songs by Matt Redman and Hillsong, they're not spiritually enlivening. They are. They fulfill their role. But we've also got to think about our religious and racial identity and how those things can come together. We should have a black British church hymnal. We should have them. We should have songs that we can call on and say, these are our songs. We should have music that reflects our experience. Our young people are dying on the roads. Where's our music that engages with some of that suffering, some of that difficulty, the trauma that we have gone through as a community? We need our songs to reflect that. And we've got the brilliance. We can do it. We can do it. So, in closing, to quote Moiwa, we need to come to a stage, arguing my thesis, that this situation where many of the churches, and I'm not saying all, I looked at a particular borough, and the findings that I found in my other 3 churches were very similar. There were variations, there was some Sinach and some other people that was sung in some of the churches. There were some variations, but there was an overwhelming domination of Hillsong and CCM. So I'm urging all of us to think about how we can find ways to privilege our own artistic, religious, and musical identity and remember where we come from. Thank you.